Good good evening, everyone. Most of you know me. Well, yes, nearly all of you know me, but we've got some guests here today. Um, and I think this is our last public session, Joanna, is that correct? We all met together late last month in Ealing for a whole day session on our recommendations and how they're taking shape, which they're very, very promising. And so this is the last one that we very much wanted to have. And so can I thank all our political leaders for taking time out to be with us this evening. Before I begin, I want to introduce the team, the 18, the commissioners that have given so much to this commission. My name's Simon Woolley, Lord Woolley, and I'm the joint co-chairperson with Joanna, who can't be with us this evening. Next, could I ask Malhan to introduce himself, please?
Mohan Luthra, long-standing Ealing resident, been chair of CRE and also been involved in other organizations, and now retired civil servant. Yeah,
Retired civil servant and good troublemaker.
Good. That's so kind of you. Thank you.
Callum.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Callum Anson. I'm a governor. One of the commissioners, but also I'm a governor at Dormers Wells High School in Southall, and also at West London College, which has campuses in Ealing and Hammersmith and Fulham. So really pleased to join you all tonight.
Thank you, Callum. Denise.
Hello, my name is Denise Charles, and I'm a commissioner as well. I work at West London College as a head of curriculum there for three different areas, and I'm also the chair for a local charity called Descendants based in Acton.
Great stuff, Denise. We've got two Edmonds, Edmund A and Edmund Y. Edmund A, can you introduce yourself, please?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Edmund Akeje. I'm one of the commissioners. I'm an Ealing resident, and I also work with a legal charity here in Ealing, the West London Equality Centre.
Thank you very much. Edmund Y.
Hello, good evening. My name is Edmund Yu. I'm one of the commissioners. I'm a long-time resident of Ealing and the chair of the Chinese Information Advice Center in London, Chinatown, and also the chair of the Civil Neighborhood team in Westminster. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edmund. Laura.
Thank you, Lord Woolley. Good evening, everyone. My name is Laura Forrester, and I am a long-standing resident of the London Borough of Ealing. I've lived in Northolt for over 25 years. I'm an adult social care lawyer, and also I have a voluntary position as a cultural diversity champion. And of course, I am one of the commissioners.
Thank you, Laura. Mark.
Thank you, Lord Woolley. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Paulson. I'm a Church of England priest in Southall, and I'm convener of the Southall Faith Forum, representing the faith community.
Thank you. And last but not least, Nicola.
Thank you, Simon.
You put yourself on mute by accident, Nicola.
My apologies. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nikki Flash. I am a secondary school teacher. I am one of the commissioners, and I am a resident in Ealing. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. The commissioners normally refer to me as Simon. I don't know why they're doing the Lord business today, but I'm happy for our political leaders to refer to me as Simon. That's great. Before we begin, I would want to give a 2 minutes background on whilst we're here. You know, as you'll all know, it's been a tumultuous couple of years with COVID-19 and George Floyd's death and the protests. And I was really moved by the way that Ealing responded and wanted to I guess, dive into, lean into, if you like, the questions that many people asked through Black Lives Matter, which looked at the persistent race inequalities right across the piece within the borough. And as a result, this commission was set up and I was asked to chair. And we've had a remit to be bold, to be brave, to be clear about finding solutions, recommendations that will not just paper over the cracks of race inequality, but to build a platform that will last for a generation, unleash talent. So we've looked at key areas across the borough: health, education, criminal justice, housing. We've spoken to young people, and it's been exhausting but rewarding, very rewarding. And we hope to come up with a powerful set of recommendations. The one gap that we've got is democracy and participation, and that's why we've asked some of our leaders to come here tonight and lay out what they think are the challenges, and then we'll ask questions. It's not the Spanish Inquisition, but you will be challenged. It won't be a walk in the park, but this is not question time or point scoring politics. Our North Star is to lay bare uncomfortable truths and find solutions that will empower a generation of residents in Ealing. So on that, Joanna, because I've dashed back from Cambridge, I don't have all my notes with me on the who's speaking first. So if I can delegate to you, if I may, because I know you always have the notes in front of you.
To see who's speaking. So we've got Peter speaking first and Gary from the Liberal Democrat group. We haven't got the leader of the Conservative group with us, has not been able to make it. So it's just those two. Okay. So on the agenda, I've suggested that they have a bit of an introduction and then we kind of go straight into questions and discussion.
Great. So just because you're in my eye line, I'm going to ask Councillor Peter Mason, leader of the council. We've spoken when he first took this role, and we had a very good conversation. He was very supportive of it. So, Peter, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And I did want to start by sort of reflecting on the conversation that we had. I was very conscious that when I took over the leadership, that the commission was running. And I think one of the first things that I wanted to do, I think it was actually in the week between having been elected the leader of the Labour group, then being elected leader of the council, was, Simon, to sort of call you and to give you my absolute assurance that the commission would continue its work and it would have to be and continue to be independent and have all the resource and support that it needed. I have to say it was also great to sort of discuss our mutual childhoods in the glorious city of Leicester. And I think we discussed a little bit, didn't we, the challenges of Leicester's history, one of structural racism, unfortunately, in how it managed its housing allocations policy that saw you grow up on the St Matthew's estate and that saw me grow up on the New Parks estate, despite the football matches that took place between the two. Listen, I sort of want to start on the themes that you've given me on engagement and on representation to sort of set out a bit behind the slogan, the vision piece that we put out. When we as an administration sort of talk about the open, transparent and inclusive council that we want to build, fundamentally what sits behind those three words is the sense of power. Who has it, who needs it, and who could do with a little bit more of it, and quite frankly, who could do with a little bit less of it. And when we formed the new administration, we said very clearly at the outset that tackling inequality was one of the three key priorities of the organisation. I don't think I necessarily need to rehearse, having watched your deliberations quite closely, the depth with which you've gotten into some of the real issues around structural inequality in health, housing, and in other areas. I think they stand, but in sort of focusing on engagement and representation, really to flesh out a few things. So when we think about open, transparent, inclusive, part of me does believe that this is cultural. within local authorities, but it's also cultural within the British system, and it's sort of cultural within democracy, to say the least. You know, the origins of local government, unfortunately, are quite, I'd say, sinister. Local government really sort of took on its format that it did as it has today, right back in the 1800s, around poor law unions that were organised geographically around workhouses. They transitioned into sanitary districts and eventually metropolitan districts. And they really came out of a school of thought that was very Victorian, patrician, paternalistic in their attitude, and still in sort of embedded with that culture that said that we do things to people rather than doing things with people. And in the case of local government domestically, it was about sanitizing the poor, sort of in that same imperial decade when the Victorian mindset was abroad, you know, one of so-called civilization. And so it's no surprise to me that some of that attitude still is imbibed in how local government works. That culture remains, and it's written large, and it's alive and well in local government. And I'd say we are susceptible to it too. A consistent challenge that local government has is that it has this tendency to want to decide amongst ourselves what the right thing to do is, present it to the public, defend it against all opposition, and then either implement or U-turn. And what that means is that consultation has a tendency to be a process with a determined outcome rather than being the type of conversation that we would want to have. And if you layer that on top of austerity and you layer that on top of the 11 years that we've had of having to make very, very difficult decisions about the rationing of our services, it's meant that we've had to have a significant number of difficult conversations with the public about those competing priorities. And, you know, and as administration, we've obviously got the priorities, and, you know, I don't want to, as you rightly say, Simon, this isn't today about scoring political points, but we sort of come to these challenges with a set of decisions and a set of priorities about what we will do, and we try and communicate that with the public. But we can't deny that there has been an impact, and we know very clearly that there is a direct correlation between poverty and diversity. We know very well about the statistics of who lives on our council estates. We know who have adverse access to employment and to genuinely affordable homes. And as I say, you know, and I'm very happy and very clear to say that, you know, we are cognizant that that is because of structural inequality and institutional racisms. But nevertheless, we find ourselves having to take difficult decisions that have impacts and consequences for people. And in that scenario, it's quite easy to be defensive against criticism. And politicians and council officers and the public, we are all human beings. And there is both a physical and an emotional response to those situations when the shutters come down. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do as an administration in charting our new course, when we talk of our open, transparent and inclusive culture, is that we really need to move beyond the paternalism and the patricianism of the past and build new relationships that are ones built on trust and disclosure. We have to acknowledge that disagreements are sometimes very, very likely, but the more that we involve people in conversations about their communities, about their places, and about what they want to achieve, we can build things like social capital and social proof and shared understanding that people can have those grown-up conversations about very, very difficult scenarios. And instead, you build a model around first engaging, listening, building that shared understanding, and then agreeing the changes that we need to make. And actually, if you look at the history of the London Borough of Ealing, it's actually communities that have stepped up to some of our biggest challenges. It hasn't been us necessarily as a council, as an institution, but you think back to the role that the IWA played in bringing about the end of busing in Southall, or you think about Sister Supporter, who came together to defend women's right to choose free from intimidation. And then just looking back at the last couple of years to see the role that communities have come forward to provide food banks and come together in mutual aid during COVID, even picking up litter through Lagercan, our Parks Foundation, residents and tenants associations and the huge number of faith and community and campaign groups who all want to have an active interest and participation in civic life and the change that is happening in our borough. And I'll finish on representation, because I know it's also a theme. There is huge power in role models, and we have to face the reality that there are glass ceilings. And I think much of this is about the model of culture and leadership that you set out. It's about whether you operate a culture that seeks to include people rather than excluding them, whether you seek to empower people or whether you disempower them. And I don't think there is such a concept of correct experience. Too often we try to translate or discount people's lived experience and discount it instead for professional, technical and managerial experiences, which as politicians and as people who are supposed to be connected and grounded within communities to understand their aspirations, I certainly know which one I think is more important. That does mean that we've got challenges. It means that we've got a challenge in the senior leadership of our council. We have scenarios in which quite a lot of our frontline staff do reflect the communities that they work with. And in many circumstances, like children's social care, for example, we deliberately work to ensure that those who are working on the front lines with disproportionately impacted communities have those shared experiences. But that's not reflected in the hierarchy of the organisation the further you go up the chain, and we know that we have to do something about that. Likewise, in our political environments, whilst the Labour group on the council is 51% BAME, we know that we still have underrepresented groups within our party, both in terms of BAME but also gender. And we have to appreciate and understand that there are structural barriers to why people would want to put themselves forward. And quite often you have to do the work of encouraging people to stand and asking them directly to do so if that's their aspiration, but removing the barriers that exist for people's participation. So finally, to say, I'm really looking forward to the results of your commission and the final report. I know that there are going to be some very difficult conversations that we're going to need to have, but I'm a great believer that you have to have a difficult conversation and that you have to listen and understand before you can act. And if that means that we have to come, as I say, to a shared understanding about the challenges that we've got ahead of us, then that should be something that is absolutely paramount.
Thank you very much, Peter. Before I let you go, and thank you for your conciseness in outlining what you see as the challenge. I thought it was very clear, historically and today. But you didn't really expand much on the solutions. I don't know whether you want to spend a couple of minutes on what you as the leader of the council would like to do in actually closing some of these, not just disparities, but inequalities in terms of representation and confidence and people engaging. Just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, look, I mean, since sort of taking over, I mean, the sort of the direct policy has been one of leaning in. You used that phrase earlier on. My cabinet have heard me say that a million times, probably over the last 4 months, which is that every conversation is valuable and that we have to, as political leaders, spend a significant amount of our time engaging with communities to actually understand what their aspirations and what their needs and what their challenges are. And I think in the last 4 months, we've spent so much time with community and campaign organisations, probably more time in the last 4 months than we've probably done over a significant period of time. And that's meant that we've had to sort of really face into and lean into some quite difficult and challenging discussions over our plans for the Young Adult Centre in Southall, over our plans for facilities, over our plans for our housing management and allocation service. The challenges that we face in adult social care provision and some of the challenges that we've got in supporting our looked after children and our children leaving care. But unless you have those conversations as political leaders, I don't think you necessarily can sort of take level-headed decisions about where you put resources. And as a political administration in a council, that's fundamentally what this comes down to. It comes down to where we put our energy and focus on priorities. And you know, I would be clear in my mind that having seen your deliberations and knowing full well what those challenges are, you know, they're precisely the ones in which the administration knows that we need to do something about. You know, we need to do something about the fact that the housing waiting list is 29% black, right? That tells you something about structural racism and structural inequality in terms of who can get access to genuine affordable housing. That means it recommits and rededicates our efforts on building genuinely affordable homes, and making sure that we are working with those communities disproportionately impacted by the lack of jobs. And we've recently launched a Good Jobs program that is seeking to go back out into the community and go back out into working with employers to ensure that they're paying the living wage, that their employment practices are correct. They've got the ability to do skills escalators, but they're also targeting those people who are out of work the most. And likewise, you know, working with our schools team and the Ealing Learning Partnership, you know, to make sure that where we know that we've got significantly high levels of exclusions, we do have significantly high levels of, or disproportionately high levels of exclusions for some minority ethnic communities, that we actually know what's driving that, and that we're working with communities to bring in mentors, that we're working with them to identify why those challenges exist. But this is fundamentally about resources. It's about what you prioritize and where your focus goes to, and that will ultimately be the proof of the pudding.
Great, thank you, Peter. If I could now pass to Councillor Gary Malcolm, you're the leader of the Liberal Democrats. Gary, thank you for taking time out to join us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, so I'll start off just by indicating some of my initial thoughts on how I would either make changes or have an approach. Some of what Peter said, I totally agree with, and I think he talks about consulting people, greater dialogue. That I think is what is needed in greater stead now. When I knock on doors every week, there are always some people who are just they feel as if their vote is not worth anything. They feel it isn't worth. Feel they struggle so much, and there needs to be a lot more engagement from the political process, the council, and other groups. And I think some of those things can be done, but we do need these people who can be figureheads, if you like, for them, and motivators. And so I know, for example, many projects in my area, I never stand out there and say, I have all the answers, I can solve these problems. What I do say to people is there is a set of council officers who are experts at different issues, transport, environment, etc., housing, but actually sometimes residents know the answer to some of the problems that they've got, and we sometimes have to trust residents. And that's where I think Peter was talking about, we have to actually go a bit further than we've done before and actually consult people, even on some of these difficult issues, even if people actually flatly refuse what appears to be a good idea. And that shows we haven't won them over. We haven't explained to people what that proposal is. And I think going back a stage, the council and other authorities need to actually engage at an earlier stage. So I know that in the political process, when I've gone to the beginning of an issue where there is a problem, I've said to people, okay, there is a problem here. How do we stop this happening in 6 months, in a year's time? How do we engage with these different groups? Who are these groups we need to engage with? Let's not put any pride sort of barriers in the way and say, I know the answers. Let's listen to everyone. Let's come up with a solution. It may not always be easy. It may be my initial thought was right or wrong. Someone else's thought may be right or wrong. And I think there is always people who have the answers to solve many of the problems that we've got. And I think we need to trust people a lot more than sometimes we do. And so I think Peter gave some good examples of COVID. The example I've written down before was about the Facebook groups that set up in the middle of COVID. So the council obviously had a large database of volunteers, but before that could really be actioned, people on the streets weren't contacting the council directly. They were setting up their own Facebook groups, their own WhatsApp groups, and many people around the borough were doing those things because they felt they could empower people regardless of the communities they were in, regardless of who was in that block, who needed help. And I think we need to support more of the residents. We need to signpost more of these positive stories that people are doing, because many of them during COVID, people were amazing. And I think we need to empower more people to have the confidence to do some of these things. That's part of what I'm doing there, which is about sort of listening and dialogue at an earlier stage. I think the council needs to do that. Some other sort of areas that we've got, I know you wanted to touch on sort of voter representation perhaps, and involvement at an early stage. I think in COVID we've missed a number of sort of areas of dialogue that the council would have had but hasn't, because it couldn't have face-to-face meetings. And I do think when I've had face-to-face meetings with residents, people from a range of different communities, different demographics, we can have dialogue and speak to each other about different council issues that they raise, whether they be housing problems. And I've made more of an effort in the past year to sometimes just almost forget COVID and say, how can I visit that person's house and be nearer to their issue that they're trying to explain to me, without breaking the rules, to actually see what that problem is they're trying to explain, rather than just having the phone call. And I think when I go to a number of different estates and I see some of the housing issues, that to me shows there are problems, as Peter has mentioned. And I think we need to be better at linking in with people in a lot of these areas. I think some of the areas where I think the council has made some positive actions in the future, and it probably needs to expand upon them, are sort of the tenant management organisations, which I know on the South Acton estate, which is not too far from me, they have worked really well. They've actually encouraged and motivated residents who normally will be a bit, not meaning to offend anyone, but pissed off with the council for not doing certain things. And actually they then have the power and the support of the council to fix some of the situations that are there. And I think that actually allows a wider set of people to be brought in and motivated to being involved, I think, as well. I think the council has a great deal of resources, not just in terms of how it can signpost people who do have problems, and different groups have a greater set of problems than others. But I think the council as a whole needs to be sort of engaged at a much earlier stage, which I think I've sort of mentioned before.
Okay.
I think I'll stop there if that's appropriate, because I know you.
Yes. No. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, because I want to give a lot of time to our commissioners. And Joanna, if there's any outside questions from the Ealing citizens, if you can let me know. But I know a lot of people engage afterwards when they watch this back, and or begin conversations online or offline. I just want to begin by listening to both of you to really zoom out, and I know you both realise that the heart of local government is its democracy, and it's also fair to say we're all very acutely aware that this borough has been one of the most challenged boroughs in the UK in the last year. Some might say one of the most. I mean, given Heathrow Airport and its demographics, and when we consider that democracy and which you mentioned, Peter, power is central to the response, then this session is so important. And what we've been struck by listening to citizens and looking at the data, that for some communities, this is perhaps the most unrepresentative borough for some communities in the country. And I don't know how long that you've been politically active, with the Liberal Democrats or the Labour Party. But it would be remiss for me not to ask you the question, on your watch, not just as leaders, how is it that this council, for some communities, often those that Peter and Gary have said are at the sharp end of inequality, have been the least represented? How has that happened? Gary, let me turn to you.
I think part of it is the representation comes from the sort of the figurehead of who is the councillor, who is the chair of a resident association, who is the local person who someone may see as a change maker in their own area. And I think certainly in my party, I will acknowledge that we're only a smaller party, so we don't have a large number of councillors compared to other groups. However, I don't think I would be happy to be able to say we've succeeded at getting a diverse range of candidates at each election. I've always thought we need to do more, and we've never quite succeeded to anywhere near the level that I think is needed. Other parties, I think, have done a better job than my own. I'm not happy to say that, but I have to acknowledge that. And there are things that we've tried to do at a regional level and across London, if you will, and a local level. And some of those do have generated some positive outcomes, whether there be people who are school governors who may not have wanted to be a councillor, but they want to be a school governor because they see that as their sort of way of contributing to society. But I think we need to go a lot further on those sort of areas, because I don't think the council makeup as a whole is fully diverse, and also those who are actually in power within the council aren't necessarily as diverse as they need to be in terms of acting.
Okay. Same question to you, Peter. If power is central to confidence, to equity, to belonging, why are some communities in Ealing so powerless?
Because the story of power is that when people have it, they don't want to give it up. And I think that's, if you think about the history of where we have come to in Southall, power has been taken by people who struggle for it. I'm from the Jewish community. It was 100 years ago, really, that the Jewish community went through the process of migration, integration, and gradually representation to Britain from the Pale of the Settlement from Eastern Europe. And that story of dispossession, of travel, of wanting to seek out a better situation or a circumstance is written large across pretty much every community of all races and faiths and national origins. But it's also come with struggle. The councillors from,
sorry to interrupt, Peter, but I'm sure you're not saying that people from the African and Caribbean communities
no, not at all.
Have not struggled.
No, that's definitely not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think what I'm saying is barriers exist for people to be able to access. The fight in Southall in the 80s was around people coming forward who wished to be represented, who wanted to take on those roles of civic responsibility, but they were excluded. And it took a coalition. It took a coalition of the Indian Workers Association and so many of the other campaigning organisations, along with people who knew that the situation needed to change that dynamic. It's difficult for people to want to give up power, but it has to happen. And as a political party, we've gone on a long journey. We've gone on a very long journey. We are almost at the stage now where we've got gender parity, and we do that deliberately by using all women shortlists. We're allowed to do that under the Equality Act. That's what our government legislated back in 2010 and before. And I'm intent on ensuring that we can use those powers that are enabled to us to get up to gender parity. Unfortunately, the Equality Act needs to change in order for us to be able to to use temporary special measures to ensure that we have better representation from underrepresented communities. But it's ultimately about how my political party works with communities to bring forward and create space in which people can take on those roles and those responsibilities. Because, you know, as Gareth said, it's ultimately this is equally about role models. If people do not see those people occupy those spaces, then those spaces do not look like that they are for people who have that shared lived experience. We have one councillor from a Somali background, one councillor from a Black or an Asian background, Black or an African background. The remaining total of our BAME candidates, our BAME councillors, I should say, are from South Asia. Right? You know, we are 51% BAME, but we know that within that we do underrepresent certain communities within the borough. But we have to work with people to put that right.
Okay, well, so we clearly acknowledge a gross deficit for certain communities. We know that that undermines democracy. So I guess let me open it up to the commissioners. And I know that some of you might be quite, well, I know all of you are passionate about this, but I want you to, if you could, to ask those questions that will lead to answers and solutions, rather than beat our politicians, which I know there's an instinct for that because it's on their watch, right? But we've got to get something out of this to move the dial, and the urgency couldn't be stronger. That how we get a representative democracy in Ealing. So let me open up to the floor and the participants. Please raise your hand. I've got Denise first. Denise, then Nicola, and then Mark.
Thank you. So my question is exactly what Simon said. It's, for me, what are your strategies going forward that you are going to break down those barriers to ensure that democracy is being fair and equality is being fair? What are the strategies going to be? What are your plans? Can you share those with us? That, if that can be to Councillor Mason, please, first.
Okay, before you answer, Peter, does any of the other hands up lean into that question? So Nicola and Edmund, please. Nicola first.
Thank you, Simon. So my question is for Peter. So you've said that, you basically said that the term BAME sort of masks underrepresentation, and currently there's no African Caribbean representation in the council, and there is one African councillor. So I just want to know, what very specific things, strategies do you have planned to encourage more participation from the African Caribbean community? So obviously you are doing things to encourage more women councillors. So based on that, what very specific things, examples can you do to encourage more participation? Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Edmund, and then Mohan.
Thank you, Chair. I think I should start by saying I had the privilege of serving as a councillor for the Perrier Ward in the year 2006 to 2010. And I can be quite sure to also say I'm the first Chinese councillor of Chinese origin. And it has never been before and thereafter until now. And I echo the same questions about, so what are you doing about it in terms of your strategies, in terms of your efforts as a council to open up that balance? And whilst I accept explanations like from Gary, who was my former colleague at the council, and I'm pleased he's still there, to some extent it's true that it all depends on the parties and their structure and the way they elect their councillor candidates. But I think this goes beyond the associations or the respective parties. It's got to be the council that should also take the lead, because when you put it on a mirror, you can see, wow, you know, that balance is not there, and that has been going on for so many, many years. So really, the question is, what are you doing about it? Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Marhan, is yours on a similar line or is it distinct? Unmute yourself first. Marhan, unmute yourself first.
I just want to raise the issue. There's obviously colleagues have raised the issue of statistical parity and representation. I don't want to repeat that there are some legitimate issues that need addressing. I just wanted to check that I've lived and worked in Ealing over the years, and one of the things which seems to bother me is that the electoral based democracy has its own limitations, and there are a lot of flaws that needs addressing. But it seems that critical analysis of policy or drawing upon the talent within the borough to have an alternative inroad into the communities. So community economic development, we lost community relations councils, we don't have law centers anymore. So the whole idea of having a critical friend, which is not necessarily the sort of relies on electoral side, has been kind of lost. And I was wondering to what extent the leaders think that there is a new revival needed of community development. So you can have people who can be critics of you, and they can be listened to, they could do their own analysis. And I'm wondering if we're missing a trick in terms of utilizing a whole army of people with expertise in the communities who may be even retired, they're professionals who want to make contributions. We do not have an alternative system of input at the moment. And I wonder if there are any thoughts to that effect.
Okay, thank you, Marwan. If I could ask Peter first to answer some of those challenges. Now, Peter, everybody on this commission knows there's no magic wand, but you did say that people being center stage and having a voice is critical. And you also said that in the past, citizens feel, and in part the present, that things are done to them rather than included in. What people want to know, what is your plan to have a council that begins to look like the people it's seeking to serve, and what is your plan to build trust in which things are not done to people, but people are engaged as part of putting things right in the borough?
So I think there's both there's big and then there's practical, right? At a big level, right, it starts with having a theory of change for the organization that says that the reason that we exist is to change people's lives for the better, with them, not for them. And if you set that as your core central principle, and that is the guiding mission through which you see all problems, you can focus people precisely on that type of method. And what I've been certainly trying to do, not just before taking over the leadership, but also in the run, in previous roles, has been trying to create environments and spaces in which those conversations can happen. So, for example, we've established a community review panel, which we hope will eventually develop into 7 community review panels for different parts of the borough that will be representative of their local community, but add an additional voice and a layer for people who want to be involved in discussions about the future of their communities in regards to things like planning and housing development and regeneration. The commission model is very popular in Hammersmith and Fulham, which formed the basis actually of the commission that we're sort of having a discussion in right now, I think is an excellent idea that we should be looking at rolling out into different areas too. We have to resolve the issue of the future of what we call our ward forums, which are the sort of the public meetings through which councillors engage with the public and provide that degree of public scrutiny for things that are happening at a ward level. But there's also incredible and amazing things that can be done with technology, right? The conversations that we had over sort of the neighbour wall or in physical locations, the conversations that people have when they want to change their communities are happening in new and interesting spaces, and they're happening digitally. part of the way that the council has to think is to be responsive to where all those conversations are happening. And if we know that those conversations are happening in lots of different spaces, we have to be there and we have to be listening. But in terms of political representation, like, it's also important that we do this as political parties. The challenge is on us. And some of those challenges are things that we need to change at a national level. We have to change section 104.7 of the Equality Act, right? It's taken temporary special measures to get female representation, to get women's representation to 50% in something like Parliament or the London Borough of Ealing. It would not have happened if spaces that are usually dominated by white men get to decide who gets to be political candidates, right? If you just allow that to happen, white men get selected. So,
Peter, in the absence of that, that's not
so
what
we, yeah, exactly, and that's my next point. So what we then have to do as a political party, and it's work that's already started, certainly within mine, is to go out into the community, is to find people who want to stand, is to work with them to help them understand the networks that exist within the Labour Party, how you obtain power, how you build those relationships, and how you work with people to bring them into the system, and you provide the opportunity for them to then stand, and make sure that you're an inclusive and open space that doesn't sort of deliberately exclude people.
So here's $1 million question.
Yeah.
How many black people are members of the Ealing Labour Party? Do you know?
Very good question. I mean, I know that this is all about who's got access to data. So I don't think I've got access to demographic data from within. I know that we've got about 4,500 members. I wouldn't be able to tell you precisely how many of them are from Black or African backgrounds.
When you go to your local Labour Party meeting,
yeah,
how many black people do you see at that meeting?
Very few.
So you see very few. Can you tell the commissioners what is your plan? What has been your active plan to recruit members who you see very few of at the party? What is the plan? You say, you look around and you say, not many Africans or Caribbeans here, not many Somalis here. We need to have an aggressive plan. What is that? What?
Well, if you're asking, if you're asking for sort of like, the piece of paper, the political strategy, that piece of paper doesn't exist. But I think the mindset that we are.
And if I may say so, and this is where these conversations become difficult.
Yeah.
Therein lies the problem, that there's no paper, because it's the paper and the policy that will drive change, not just your good heart, which I know you, Peter, and I know that you have that. And I think what this panel commission is looking for in terms of leadership is the paper. There's the paper that starts off with, let's have a look at who we are. We're not looking great. What is the plan? To go to the churches and the mosque to say, we cannot be representative until you join our party. What is the strategy? What is the targets? How are we going to do this? And until that happens, nothing much changes, I'm afraid. And I think the biggest thing about it is that actually it's not just about your party. It's about magistrates, it's about school governors, that leaders say, this is where we want to change. Think about that. Malcolm, Gary, I want to hear your plans. I want to know the same things. How many black people you have in the party? What is the plan? And if there isn't a plan, admit there isn't a plan. No prevarication, because people are tired of that. But I've kept Mark waiting far too long. Mark.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. Absolutely fascinating conversation. I guess I want to sort of agree with Peter's analysis, because I think your analysis of the situation is spot on, but would want to say, who is giving up power and what are the mechanisms for giving up power? I think that actually the representation which you've talked about, even in Southall, in terms of South Asian, it's not even completely South Asian, it's virtually exclusively Punjabi. The Afghans, the Tamils, let alone the Somalis, African Caribbeans, white working class, totally unrepresented. And there is this yawning chasm, which is now I would say 10, 15 years too late. So we're actually sort of playing catch up, but I'm wondering what the mechanism is for actually saying to councillors, it's time to step down. Because my perception is that we're talking about a huge age demographic within our councillors as well. So younger people not represented as well. And I think we've got a massive problem. So I just want to sort of ask you about what the actual mechanism is that you have for asking people to give up power, because that's the way round the section 104 that you quite rightly spoke about. Because in the absence of that happening, there needs to be some definitive mechanism. Otherwise, we'll still be having this conversation in 10 years' time.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, I know you're not pulling your punches, but I know that these punches are with a good heart for dramatic change. Gary, we want an honest conversation with you. As I said before, this is not news night or question time. This is about an honest reflection of political parties on how they turn this around. So what say you?
I'll tell you, you asked me a question just before you went to Mark, but the honest truth is I don't know the exact number, but when I go to a meeting, a branch meeting or a constituency meeting, there aren't very many people who are Caucasian, and therefore I know there is an issue. The community of Ealing, the community of my ward doesn't look like that, and so that isn't right. We're not good enough in terms of recruiting. One of the things we've done in the past 6 months, partly because of COVID and using sort of Zoom and those sort of techniques, we've found role models who are councillors or activists elsewhere in London from different community groups who can inspire people in Ealing to give some of their stories about what are the barriers they've had to becoming elected, what did they do to get over those barriers themselves, and then answer questions that people in Ealing have had. And I hope some of those things will lead to more people who are not white.
See, the thing is, Gary, we don't want any more. We don't want to live off hope. We want to live from action. And if I was to say to you, how long have you been a councillor, Gary?
I've been a councillor for 19 years.
How many black people have you got to join the party?
I would say I'm not really someone who signs up very members for my party.
Why not? Why not?
I guess part of it is how much time I'm spending as a councillor, perhaps.
Yeah, and if we're honest, that if you don't lean into that, then in 19 years, not much changes. This is what these honest conversations are about today. That we've just said the door's open, but not gone out there and made the effort to make the changes. And what we want to do from this commission is to lay bare the uncomfortable truths and have an aggressive plan to turn things around. And that's why we're trying to tease out what has been done, and we will hope to give you some solutions too, because it's pretty desperate. I mean, Mark outlined it's not just Caribbean and African, it's white working class. I thought, Peter, Mark laid down a pretty strong gauntlet to you, particularly to you, because your party rules the roost there. And we should explore that about, in the short term, how can we say to people, we want our democracy to be representative, we want it to be inclusive, and it isn't. And so I need people to stand down, particularly those that have been around for a long time. Is that a fair challenge, Peter?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair challenge. It comes with layers of structural and structural challenges. It comes with the challenge of perhaps having to have some difficult conversations with the people who employ me. So much of the political dynamic and the way that local government is structured and the way that, 69 people deciding who gets to be the leader of the council works is that politics often puts up results that shouldn't be the case. I would dream of a situation and dream of a Labour group that is absolutely representative of the borough that we seek to represent. Right, that is my goal. And Simon, reflecting on the challenge that you put to Gary, one of the things that I spend a good amount of my time doing is, when we find perhaps it's not enough going out to the wider community to get them to the Labour Party, but when good people come forward into the Labour Party, is about finding those individuals and about working with them and having those conversations, sitting with them over coffee, exploring their aspirations, talking about their stories, where they've come from, what they want to do, and to sort of spread those wings in order that people come into the system. Because we of course have the challenge of needing to ensure that those perhaps who've been around for a very, very long time should take the grace and retire. We also need to make sure that we've got good people coming through the system too.
Now, Peter, I'm very much aware that you pledged an hour to us, and we're over that. And Edmund, you're going to get the final question, but before that, Peter, that I would like you to make some pledges, if you feel bold enough to do that, about the theory. You talked about it, not just the theory of change, but the action of change, to what you've heard today, because we would like to showcase your pledges and yours, Gary, that the people, the citizens of Ealing, can see something different tomorrow and in the future. And I think that would not just give them hope, but would give them a belief that they can effectively engage. So Edmund, the last question is from you to Peter. Peter will respond, and then Peter, of course, we will come back to you with a from our continued conversation, and then if you can find time to engage in that. Edmund.
Thank you very much, Chair. This week is the National Hate Crime Awareness Week. It is
what week? Say that again.
The National Hate Crime Awareness Week.
Yep.
It's also the Black History Month. And one of the recurring themes from what we gathered back as commissioner is the lack of people's trust in the system, that they are being listened to, that matters of their interest are being taken into account. And the council has a remit to narrow inequalities, to promote efforts that tackle discrimination and bias in our communities. What hate crime reduction plan, or what's the hate crime strategy of the council? What is the action plan to tackle hate crime that Ealing Council has? Do you have a hate crime liaison officer that is at the forefront of this effort to fight these things?
Thank you, Edmund. So if you can incorporate that, Peter, with your final remarks. And can I just say thank you for engaging. You haven't shied away from any of the pointed questions. And we hope that you see this as a mandate for you to be the boldest you've ever been in your life, the boldest. And we believe if you lean into that, that we'll have the greatest changes that we've probably seen for a very long time in Ealing. Yeah. Peter, there's the final moments for you before you have to leave.
Yeah, look, this is something I get, right? This isn't just something I get superficially. This is something I get to my core. I just spent the last 5 years of my life working with inside the Labour Party on an Equality and Human Rights Commission referral on the basis that, as a Jew, seeing the anti-Semitism in my party and seeing the crisis that it faced internally was completely unacceptable. And I used equality law and I persevered to ensure that we did something about it. And I don't shy away, and that's often caused me some troubles with inside my own party and even locally too. But I didn't shy away from that fight. And I know that my equality is the same equality for everybody on this call and for everybody in the borough too. And sometimes that means having to do very difficult things, but doing it with a degree of commitment and resolve that is required. And that is my commitment. Now, there are the challenges that we consistently face in local government. And Edmund, the challenges of resources are such. We absolutely have teams of people in our community safety team who are attuned and work on things like hate crime and things like community safety. God, I wish I had the same resources that we had 11 years ago, because we could do so much more, and we have to ration what we have and focus and target the communities that we need to target. But I wouldn't have set as a new leader a priority of tackling inequality as one of the 3 key themes of our administration if I weren't intent on absolutely focusing on where those inequalities exist, listening to everything that you say in terms of your reports to us, but then going about making that commitment. And politically, in terms of giving you some commitments, look, I would love to be, and the Labour Party is going through its selection processes right now. We are quite literally interviewing candidates, and we're about to start our selection process for people in wards. I would love to be in a situation where in May 2022, of course, we've got a far more representative group as a Labour council, and there are candidates that are coming through that I hope that will help us do that. But I will say this, and it's not to sort of, this really isn't an obfuscation, right? I'm not trying to shift responsibility or obfuscate my own responsibilities, for which I know there are loads and a huge responsibility. The Labour Party, just like all political parties, are temporary custodians of this borough. We will do our part in increasing that representation and giving power to those who need it most. But our commitment to do that also has to be met by commitments from the other political parties who also got some responsibility. I, of course, hope that in May 2022, we'll still be running the council and we'll be running it with the most diverse group. And that commitment will be carried through across the political spectrum.
So can we get you to pledge to recruit, retain, and promote those ethnic minority communities that are not even on the radar in the local council? Actively recruit, retain, make sure they stay in the party, and promote so they can go from members to active members to councillors.
I couldn't offer you a more concrete guarantee than that is the central core driving mission, not just of my party, but me. We have to represent and be reflective of our communities if we are ever going to hope to change people's lives for the better. I cannot do that on my own. We need a representative, reflective group of people to do that. And we will drive that within my party. Absolutely.
Okay. Peter, thanks for your time, and I'm sure that you'll see our recommendation sometime soon, and we'll be looking for comments from you when we do that.